So it's very funny recording this knowing that probably no one will see it until a month or more hence, but happy Framed in September from the Lukash of September 1st on Labor Day. I have a couple of things I want to talk about in this first segment of my vlog. First of all, my project to take 15 Polaroids with my Polaroid camera here is going very, very well. I already took 7 this morning. And so before you all start laughing at me too hard because of taking 7 photos on the first day of my little personal challenge, this morning I was at my family's cabin up in the Adirondack Mountains. My mom's family has a cabin up in the Adirondacks, which we all go to a few times a year over the summer months. In the winter, in the winter we close the cabin down because it's just insanely cold up there and inhospitable. But we usually go up there several times. I sometimes go up there by myself, and so on and so forth. And so I was in a great place to take Polaroids, and so I took 7 of them. Before you see this clip of me talking, you will have seen a little clip of me struggling to try to video record myself taking one of those Polaroids up in the cabin. So you will have seen that already. But anyway, so it's the first day of Framed in September, and I did begin reading How Do We Look by Mary Beard, and I just read the kind of introduction and then the prologue to part 1. So this book isn't very long, but it's divided into 2 parts. In the first part, Mary Beard is supposed to talk about the way that the human form has been represented in art. And then in the second part, she's supposed to talk about the way that the divine has been represented in art. And also, it sounds like, based on her introduction, kind of about how questions about idolatry have been dealt with in religious art, right? Because that, especially in the Judeo-Christian Islamic religions, there's been this big push and pull between people who decry idolatry and say you should never ever represent, a figure of the divine, the figure of Jesus Christ, or the figure of Muhammad in Islam, or any other major figures in Islam, any of the major prophets of Judaism, and so on. And yet people have kept doing that in many traditions, as we know. And so I think she also is supposed to deal with that to a degree. Sorry, I'm doing shaky cam here, holding this with my hands, so my arm is getting tired. So I read the intro and the prologue to this. She started with the prologue to part 1 with the description of those big heads of the Olmecs in Mexico, which was kind of cool. She actually made me see them in a slightly different light. She described them in ways that I've never quite heard them described. And so I'm hoping that this book will keep being educational. And then another thing that I wanted to do, I'm not going to make a habit of this in these vlogs because I don't want this vlog to turn out to be 2 hours long, but I also want to read 2 passages from a book that I am not reading for Framed in September, but that periodically kind of feels very adjacent to Framed in September, and that is this behemoth. This is Christianity, the first 3,000 years. A huge history of Christianity by Diarmaid MacCulloch. And what I love about this book is that you learn, obviously, a lot about Christianity, but a lot about other avenues of history along the way, because obviously Christianity has had huge influence in many walks of life, in politics, in empire, in philosophy, in thought, in art. And he always kind of makes stops to talk about all those things. And Diarmaid MacCulloch has a few times in this book taken some time to actually stop and talk about some notable religious artists, artists who themselves portrayed the divine, some of whom I'm certain will make an appearance in Mary Beard's book. And so I just wanted to read 2 passages because he writes really beautifully about these artists. He writes really beautifully about everything in this book, but I thought it would be nice to read from this book some of the passages that are sort of Framed in September adjacent, let's say. And so the first passage that I'm going to read to you is actually about El Greco. the Greek painter El Greco. And so here is what Diarmaid MacCulloch has to say about El Greco. All right, so born in Crete, Theotokopoulos, which was El Greco's real last name, Theotokopoulos trained on the island as an icon painter, but he exploited the fact that Crete was still a colonial possession of the Republic of Venice to travel west and establish a career first in Venice, then in Rome, and finally in Spain, though there is little evidence that he ever paid more than lip service to Western Catholicism. As he traveled, his style became more and more individual, leaving behind the tranquility of the icon for stormily dramatic effects, his pictures full of glancing, restless light and brooding shadow, the figures often ghostly and elongated. This suited the dramatic tastes of some Western patrons, but throughout his long life of artistic productivity, the painter continued to inspire as much bewilderment as admiration. Indeed, he still does. The only way that the Italians and the Spaniards could find Theotokopoulos a meaningful place in their culture was to emphasize his otherness. They simply called him the Greek. El Greco's wanderings far from his birthplace are a symptom of the way in which Orthodox culture could not now harbor any radical innovation in artistic style. The West found him difficult enough. So that's a little bit on El Greco. And then the second passage is about a very different sort of painter. This is a much shorter passage about the Russian icon painter Andrei Rublev, who had one of the greatest films of all time, which bears his name, was made about Andrei Rublev, the great Andrei Tarkovsky film. But so this is what Diarmaid MacCulloch says about Andrei Rublev. Okay. By the 16th century, a long-dead monk, Andrei Rublev, came to be seen as the greatest exponent of the style in fresco and in icon painting. In 1551, his work was named in the church legislation of the Council of 100 Chapters as definitive for Russian religious art. In view of that affirmation, it is unfortunate that only one of Rublev's various surviving works in Vladimir and Moscow can now definitively be said to be his, but it is quite an exceptional piece. This is an icon of the Trinity, now in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, but up to the 1920s, an eponymous icon at the Trinity Lavra at Sergiev Posad, where it was regarded as second only in importance to the relics of Saint Sergius himself. In this work, monks of the Trinity Lavra could contemplate the dedication of their house to the Trinitarian mystery, refracted by Rublev in traditional Christian fashion through the three mysterious angel visitors to whom the patriarch Abraham had offered hospitality under the groves of Mamre. The Russian Orthodox Church declared Rublev a saint amid the millennium celebrations for the conversion of Prince Vladimir of Kiev in 1988. It was a proclamation of the centrality of sacred art to Russian Orthodox spirituality. So that's a little bit of writing about art from a book that I'm not actually reading for Framed in September. I haven't finished this. I'm, as you can see, just over the halfway point, but I feel like I can already highly recommend it, but not necessarily for Framed in September specifically. So anyway. So you will have just seen a clip of me, again, trying to record myself taking Polaroids, which is not easy. It's not easy to basically photograph yourself taking photographs. In fact, I doubt that the Polaroids that you actually see me take on camera will be the Polaroids that kind of make it into the wrap-up of Polaroids in this whole vlog. But I'm trying to document a little bit of that, just because it's fun to see where I'm trying to take photos. So where you saw me taking photos just now was actually on campus, on the campus where I teach. I teach at Pace University, at their campus in Pleasantville, in Westchester County. So Pace University has two campuses, one that is in New York City, in Manhattan, and one that is in Westchester County in Pleasantville. They also have a smaller campus in White Plains, which is just the law school, but people don't usually count that one. And I teach at the Westchester one. So that was on the Westchester Pace campus. It has a little pond there, as you probably saw. It's covered in algae at the moment, which is pretty common. But I feel like I took some nice photos there. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe there's a way that I can incorporate showing the final Polaroids that I settle on keeping within the video, not just like holding them up when I print them, but maybe like flash them on the screen or something. If I can, I will try to start doing that. But I also read a little bit more from How Do We Look by Mary Beard. I'm already almost halfway through this book. It's reading very fast. The thing is that a lot of the pages are photos of artworks that she's discussing. And I guess in addition to the artwork taking up sections of pages, the margins are fairly generous in this. Hopefully you can see that. And I'm finding this interesting. It's not mind-blowing, but there are some interesting pieces to it. Something that I've really liked so far is her discussion of some Roman portraits from, I think, the 2nd century CE, which would be AD for in the old way. And so they are these Roman portraits, but they look so modern to our eyes. And so here are some of them. Hopefully you can see them somewhat well. They're these Roman portraits that were put on graves, and they look so modern. And actually what I love about them, actually what they remind me of, is icons, is like Russian icons. And here's another one. This is probably the most beautiful one. Right? And over here, you can see that this portrait would have been on this casket here, which also has like Egyptian style images with like the half human, half animal gods and such. And I really like that, but I actually want to read you a passage that's not about those, but that is about that iconic army of soldiers that was discovered in the tomb of the Chinese Emperor Shi Huangdi. And I thought what she had to say about them was so interesting. It made me see them in a whole new light. And what's interesting, what she's going to discuss in the passage I'm going to read you, is how often we're told about how every single warrior in that army is different, has a different face. But she kind of breaks that down a little bit and shows you how that maybe overplays the uniqueness of each soldier. So let me read the passage and you'll hopefully see what I mean. So here it is. The size of this installation is still extraordinary. The detail of the figures, too. You can see the individual plates and rivets of the armor, and the heads are modeled so that no two are exactly the same. There are droopy mustaches and straight ones, elaborate top knots and close crops. The contours of their faces differ, not to mention their different styles of shoes and boots, and different armor for the various ranks of soldier. This striking individuality is not quite so simple as it seems at first glance. It is true that every single one appears to be different, but the differences that the craftsmen have introduced turn out to be formulaic. The soldiers themselves are made in pieces, with the heads slotted in last, and the variety in the facial features is the result of mixing a fairly restricted repertoire of elements, There are only a few different eyebrow types, for example, or different mustache types, put together in different combinations. They are not portraits in the way that we conventionally use the word. As one archaeologist has nicely put it, their faces are likenesses, but they are likenesses of no one. For me, to play with a different paradox, they suggest a highly standardized version of individuality. In other words, they offer a challenge to any simple notion of a true portrait, pointing to other versions of what a likeness might be. So I thought that was really interesting. That definitely made me... I've learned about that army of Shi Huangdi. A lot of Americans, I think, learn about it in their world history classes. And we learn about how every face is different, and the teachers always kind of leave it at that. But I like how she sort of makes that idea a little bit more complicated, right? It's not like every face was the actual face of a different individual person. They were kind of mixing and matching different parts together to create kind of the illusion of individuality, you could say. So yeah, this is interesting. Again, not mind-blowing. It's well written. Again, the writing isn't mind-blowing, but it is well written. I am starting to wonder whether I might find this a little bit of an inadequate read for Framed in September, and maybe I will need to find something else to read as well. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that yet, but I have a couple of other candidates in mind. If I decide to do that, I will talk about them. So anyway, that's my update for the second day. Hey everyone, so another update. It's now September 4th. I am more than 3/4 of the way through How Do We Look. I have yet to take any more Polaroids, which is probably for the best, because I was starting to worry that I would just take all of my Polaroids in like the first week of the month, and then the rest of the month would be kind of boring. So I'm sort of glad that I stepped back from that. And so How Do We Look has continued to be interesting, if not really mind-blowing. I have made my way into the second half of the book. So the first half of the book is all about the ways that the human form has been portrayed in art, whereas the second half is about how the divine has been portrayed in art and how religion has inspired art. And the second part is, I think, a bit better than the first part. There are a couple things in it that I have learned about that have been really intriguing. And the first of those is about an English artist named Christiana Herringham. And something that she did that was really kind of fascinating is she, in the early 20th century, she went to these monasteries that are carved into the side of cliff faces in India. They're called Ajanta. The location is called Ajanta. And here's a photo of Ajanta, the outside anyway. And this monastery haven't really been in use for quite some time, but the interior of them is filled with Buddhist-inspired artwork. And what Christiana Herringham and a team of other artists did is they went to these monasteries and wanted to preserve the artwork in them. And so they made copies of the artwork that they found. But what's intriguing about what they did was that they didn't really copy the art faithfully. So they kind of would copy sections of it that were more coherent, right? And sometimes they would change whole layouts to just make them more coherent. Because as Mary Beard points out, a lot of the artwork in these monasteries was telling stories from the life of the Buddha, but they wouldn't really tell them, they wouldn't really portray them in a particularly linear fashion. So you would have on a painting a story from the image from the middle of a story right next to the image from the beginning of the story, right next to a image from the first half of the story, right next to an image from the very end of the story, and so on. And so she would sort of take these images and try to make them a little bit coherent in her copies. And I just found that really intriguing. And I guess I found it intriguing the fact that these artworks were portrayed in such a way that in the originals they were portrayed in such a non-linear kind of fashion. It was kind of expected that the viewer themselves kind of participated in putting the story together, right? That they knew the story enough to put it together based on what was on the walls. And some of the artwork, based on the fragments that she includes, some of it looks beautiful. So this piece over here on this side that I'm pointing to, I think that is one of the originals, and it just looks beautiful to me. You can see the big image of the Bodhisattva on that side, which I just love those images like that. So I found that really intriguing. The other thing that I just read right now is about Islamic calligraphy. And I love how Mary Beard writes about Islamic art, because she kind of points out how a lot of people think of Islam as a quote-unquote artless religion. And of course, that's not true. Of course, calligraphy is the great art of Islam. Calligraphy and sort of designs, right? It's not just calligraphy. You'll also have designs involving like plants and other things. But calligraphy is sort of known as the great artwork of Islam. And so, it's not an artless religion. And she discusses two kind of mosques, different mosques with really fascinating and really different approaches to art. So the first one is what's called the Sankaklar Mosque in Turkey. And it looks like this on the outside. So it's built into a hill. So it does not look like what we think of as a mosque from the outside. And it doesn't really look very much like a mosque on the inside either. And so it has this very modern design to it. And yet it's still quintessentially Islamic. But there's only one piece of calligraphy in it. And it's this right here where I'm pointing to with my pinky. Really beautiful single piece of calligraphy. And I think that Arabic, that says in Arabic, I believe, "Remember your Lord much." That's what that says. So I thought that was interesting. And then she talks about the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, which is just stunning. It's just stunning. This is an image of it. I'm just hoping you all can see that. Probably it doesn't come in through great focus, but you can Google the Blue Mosque. It's beautiful. And I like the way that she writes about calligraphy as an art form. And she kind of writes about how it's not always about actually being able to read whatever is written. And that's for a couple of reasons. For one thing, a lot of people who would have gone into a mosque like the Blue Mosque in Istanbul would have been illiterate. In addition, relatedly, a lot of tourists who go in there don't read Arabic, even if they're not illiterate. But then also, like, a lot of the calligraphy you wouldn't be able to read even if you did read Arabic, just because it's really high up in the mosque or something. And so the point isn't quite being able to read the Quran. Obviously, you can read the Quran by getting your copy of the Quran, but is more as an image, right, in itself. And I like the way that she ends this section. This is what she says. "Writing is not always intended to be read. It can work in other ways too, more symbolic than practical. Islamic calligraphy is nothing less than an attempt to represent the divine in visual form, but not as human. It puts God on display as his word. It is God seen in the art of writing. To put this more strongly, in the context of all the debates within Islam about image making, and in the face of what are often taken to be simple and stringent prohibitions, calligraphy evolved to redefine what an image of God could be, transforming the word into the image." So I thought that was interesting. So anyway, this, again, is interesting, not mind-blowing, but I'm clearly getting something out of it. So, hey everyone, so it's now September 5th, and just this morning I finished reading How Do We Look by Mary Beard. And, I guess I'd say at the end of the day that there were bits and pieces of it that I really liked, that I found interesting and insightful, and I've talked about a couple of those in this vlog, so I won't go over them again. There are parts of it that I've liked. Mary Beard clearly is a good writer and is very learned. Reading this has, I think, sort of whetted my appetite to read SPQR by her acclaimed history of ancient Rome, which, of course, I've heard a lot about. But this, for me, was a little bit too slight. It kind of felt like the start of a book rather than a full book in itself. It felt like something that maybe should have been like 300, 400 pages longer than it was. It kind of felt like it should have been one of those big sort of magisterial histories of art, you know, something like the classic history of art by E.H. Gombrich, which I'm blanking on the title of, but probably a lot of people who are familiar with art history literature will know that book by E.H. Gombrich. I think it's just called The Story of Art, right? And I feel like this should have been something like that. I feel like Mary Beard should have sat down and written a much longer book like that. And it probably would have been a banger of a book in that case. It would have taken a lot longer to read, but it would have been worth every page, I imagine. As it is, again, it just feels a little bit slight. It feels like the start of something, not really a full thing in itself. Through the course of reading the book, I did learn from what Mary Beard writes in this, that this is actually a book version of 2 documentaries that she wrote and that she narrated, I think. And it very much feels like a documentary in the coverage of the subject matter. So I don't mean to disparage documentaries, but I will just say that documentary films in general, I expect them not to be as detailed as a nonfiction book. And that's generally my experience, is that they're not quite as detailed, right? A history book about the Civil War, for example, will still be much more detailed than even the best documentary about the Civil War, like the Ken Burns documentary. And so I think that's why it feels to me like this is more of a start to a book than a full book, because it's based on a documentary. It's basically the book version of a documentary. And so it's good. Again, I learned some things. I wouldn't tell people to go out and pay full price for this by any means. I got it. I was lucky. I found it at a used bookstore for cheaps, because this is a hardcover, so buying it new would have been expensive. But if you're interested in some of the stuff that I've discussed from the book in my discussions of it, then maybe get it from the library. If you can find a cheap copy, go ahead. Be my guest. It'll take you a week, or maybe even you'll read it even faster if you're a faster reader than myself. So anyway, that's the story. How Do We Look? I almost called it The Story of Art. Now, I like I was hinting at in one of the previous segments of this vlog, I'm feeling like this isn't quite an adequate read for Framed in September. And so I'm trying to figure out what I might read in addition to that. But I'm not sure what yet. But stay tuned. I think I will pick something else. Good morning, everyone. It is now September 7th. It's Sunday morning, and I'm just having my morning coffee. So I literally woke up and ate breakfast, and I'm sitting down to record. Last night, I got around to watching the film Loving Vincent, directed by Dorota Kobiela and Hughes Welchman. This film is one of the things I had on my TBD, my to be done, for Framed in September, and so that's one that I can check off. Loving Vincent is a really neat film. So it has a couple of things about it that are really cool. My understanding is that it is the first ever hand-painted animated film. So it's all hand-painted. And the painting that's used in the film for the animation very much evokes the style of Vincent van Gogh. And as you might be able to tell by the title of the film, it is a film about Van Gogh. And specifically, the film is about the circumstances of Van Gogh's death, the last weeks and days of his life. Before I get into the story, one other kind of cool thing about the animation of Loving Vincent is that it uses rotoscoping, which is a really kind of underused style of animation. This is where the filmmakers actually have real actors shoot a movie like you would for a live action film. And so in this film, you actually see the actors' faces much more apparently throughout it. So, and it has a great cast too. Saoirse Ronan is in it. She's probably the most famous actor in it. But the actors shoot a real movie, and then afterward, the animators go over and animate everything over. And this is a really cool style of animation that I wish was used more often. I can only think of a handful of films I've seen that use it. And one of the other films that I can think of was directed by the same people as Loving Vincent. It's also kind of an interesting film called The Peasants. Also, Richard Linklater, if anyone is a fan of Richard Linklater, he has directed a few films in rotoscoping. A really cool film called Waking Life, and a less cool film called Through a Scanner Darkly. And then recently he released a film called Apollo 10.5, which was done with rotoscoping, and that was a very charming film too. And reportedly, rotoscoping was also used in part for Disney's Cinderella, the classic Cinderella film that Disney did. Reportedly, I can't confirm that, but I have heard that it was used partly to make that film. So, this film is about a guy who is sort of trying to piece together the events of the last weeks and days of Van Gogh's life. He basically wants to put together whether Van Gogh really committed suicide, whether he really took his own life, or whether maybe he was murdered. And so he goes around the town where Van Gogh lived and talks to all the people who knew him and encountered him and asks them about different aspects, different things that were going on in the last weeks and days of his life, including the day that he shot himself. And so one last kind of formal note about the film is that whenever we see a scene that is a flashback to Van Gogh's past, it's always done in black and white. And the painting and animation style becomes much more photorealistic in those flashbacks, whereas the stuff that's happening in real time is done very much in Van Gogh's impressionist and very colorful style. And that's kind of a cool decision on the filmmaker's part, because what you see in that, I think, is kind of the leap that Van Gogh himself made stylistically from sort of old-fashioned, more photorealistic kind of painting to more modernist, not exactly modernist in the formal sense, but more modernist by their standards, kind of in post-impressionist style that isn't necessarily super realistic, right? So that's nothing. But what you get in this film kind of is honestly this kind of Rashomon-esque look at those last days and weeks of Van Gogh's life. We hear all these different accounts of things that were going on in his life, and a lot of them deeply conflict with each other. We hear direct contradictions between what different people say about what was going on in Van Gogh's life. For example, there's a big debacle over whether Van Gogh was romantically involved with the daughter of the doctor who worked with Van Gogh, and there are other things where we get conflicting reports. And so it becomes this kind of Rashomon-esque look at the last days of Van Gogh. And I thought that was kind of cool. I wasn't really expecting to be thinking about Rashomon as a point of comparison for this animated film about Vincent van Gogh. So I thought that was really cool. And what I thought was particularly daring, this isn't necessarily a spoiler, but it does kind of tell you a little bit about the conclusion. What I think was kind of daring is the conclusion is just that however Van Gogh died, the outcome is the same. He's dead. And so we really should celebrate his life and work rather than fuss over whether he took his own life or whether he was murdered or whatever. And I really liked that. I will say that the dialogue is at times a little bit heavy-handed. There are just times where the dialogue is heavy-handed, on the nose, a little bit corny. a little bit overwrought. And so that is a sort of a con of the film. I also feel like the film ended up reading a little bit too much like a sort of fictional documentary almost. It became more about what were the circumstances of Van Gogh's death, and was he murdered or did he kill himself? It became more of this like murder mystery. Let's piece together the different pieces of information and find out what happened, more than it was a human story about human characters. It definitely was a human story about human characters. There are a lot of personalities in this film, but at times it did read a little bit too much like a documentary rather than a piece of fiction. I'm not sure if maybe that was the point, but anyway. So I liked Loving Vincent quite a lot. My reservations notwithstanding, those reservations of mine kept it from being as brilliant as I think it could have been, because given the visual style of this film, it is just visually breathtaking. Given that visual style, I would have hoped for a more compelling story, personally. And that's kind of what I felt about Welchman and Kobiela's other film that I mentioned was done with rotoscoping, which is a pretty interesting film called The Peasants. And that film is very different. That film is a Netflix original, if any of you are interested in seeking it out. It is very much worth watching. I think has a lot more about it, arguably that is interesting in terms of like its animation and its soundtrack and other things. But the story also has a lot of problems, unfortunately. So, anyway, that's the first film that I said I was going to watch that's out of the way now. And it's September 7th now, so we're starting to make our way into the month more. So, anyway, I will leave this segment at that. Okay, so it's now a little bit later on the same day from the clip that you just saw me. And I've decided that I'm going to go outside and try to take a Polaroid of somewhere in the immediate vicinity outside of my apartment building. And I just want to explain quickly why I'm particularly going out right now. And I'm going to show you the lighting outside. So you can see it's overcast out, but still fairly bright. And that's ideal for Polaroids. For anyone who doesn't know the science of taking Polaroids, overcast is your friend when taking Polaroids, because it will keep everything well lit in any photo you take, but the light isn't so intense that it'll lead to a kind of overpowered image. And maybe I'll show you a Polaroid or two that I've taken where there's been too much brightness concentrated in certain places, and so it's led to a kind of really whitewashed image. But overcast, having clouds in front of the sun will make sure that things are lit up nicely, but not overpowered, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go and try and take a Polaroid outside right now. So you can see in this Polaroid that I took of Bessie, that up in this part of the Polaroid, it's just kind of sort of whitewash, right? And that's just because there's too much light on it. Another one that I took, and I don't think that that aspect of it spoils this Polaroid at all. It's the very first one I took, actually. But then there's also this one, which is kind of I do also like this one. It's kind of a pretentious selfie that I took when I was down in New York City for a little while. But again, you can kind of see how in this area there was just so much light that it's all just kind of whitewashed. And so that's what I'd like to avoid. lighting outside actually probably was a little bit too bright in some places. It wasn't quite as ideal as I would have hoped, but I think I got a couple of decent Polaroids, which again, I'm starting to figure out how to show those Polaroids in the middle of these videos, so one or maybe two that I like that I took today, I can show up on the screen. So ironically, this might be the only one of those that I just took that I actually like very much. I took this one and this one, which are in sepia tone, and they look kind of cool, the way that the pine needles look like that, but I'm not crazy about it. There's a little bit too much white space, I think. And then I got this photo, and I don't know, I feel like there's too much brightness, especially up here, but also on this path here. And then this one is kind of okay. It's a bunch of flowers, but again, it looks a little too bright. So overall, not a successful outing for Polaroids, I have to say. I was maybe... it might also be partly a function of the fact that it is raining out, and so that might make everything look slightly more bright because it's wet, and wet things tend to glisten. And so that may not be ideal. But this Polaroid is okay.
All right, hi everyone. It's now September 13th. It's Saturday. I forgot to record anything while I was still in my apartment, but I just got in my car to go to the train station, and I'm about to head into New York City for a work-related thing. The work-related thing is going to be relatively short, and then after that, I am planning to stop at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I hope, as well as maybe some other places. Maybe I'll stop at a bookstore or something, but I'm not sure I'm going to record that part of it. I am also bringing my Polaroid camera, so we'll see if I can get some neat Polaroids in the city. I did already take one Polaroid this morning of a fire hydrant, which maybe I'll show you later. But I'm going to see now whether I can maybe do some movie magic as a part of this blog to get you from here in my car in White Plains to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So if that movie magic works, then in a few seconds you'll see the Metropolitan Museum of Art after some movie magic. So hopefully see you soon.
Watch the gap getting on and off your train.
Hey everyone, so I just got back from New York City. I am really wiped. The opening of this little segment of the vlog was at like 7:45 in the morning, and it's now about 5:30 p.m. So I am tired, and I did not do everything in the city that I said I was gonna do. I thought I might go to like a bookstore or something, and I did not do that. I did not have the time or energy for that. I always kind of overestimate how much I'm gonna do when I go to the city, because being in New York City is kind of exhausting and overstimulating. Not just because there are so many people and sounds everywhere, but also just like navigating subways and all that is kind of a lot. But you will have by now seen some of the highlights from my trip to the Met. I had a great time there. I went straight to the Impressionist section. So there's not an Impressionist section of the Met, but there is a 19th century and early 20th century European art section, which is where you'll find Monet and Van Gogh and Cézanne and Gauguin and Pissarro and others. You'll also find a lot of Degas there and Renoir. So a lot of these iconic late 19th century into early 20th century European painters who I really wanted to make a point of seeing, mainly because the last time that I was at the Met, it was a very short visit, and I was there with my mom, and we made the mistake of going through all this other stuff through like older European art, so that by the time we got to 19th century European art and where the Impressionists would be, the Met was basically closing. So I wanted to make a point of going there first. And then I spent a lot of time in the Islamic and Middle Eastern art sections, which just was stunning. I really felt kind of overwhelmed, especially by the calligraphy, the Arabic, and not just Arabic, but Farsi and Urdu calligraphy. I just find it absolutely beautiful. I've always loved Islamic calligraphy, not just Islamic calligraphy, but it is particularly beautiful. I also saw a little bit of Chinese writing on one particular sculpture, but I didn't get much of a chance to see the Asian art section. My hope today was to go to the Impressionists, and then to see the Islamic and Middle Eastern art, and then to see the Asian art section. But I kind of ran through the Asian art section. I didn't go through very much of it, because by the time I was through the 19th and 20th century European art and the Middle Eastern art, I had spent so much time there and had been so kind of overwhelmed by the Islamic and Middle Eastern art that I just knew that I wasn't going to process very much in the Asian art section like I would like to. But the Middle Eastern section was just incredible. I have long admired the art of the Islamic world, and this just blew me away. I really love something in particular that I saw that really I loved was not just all the versions of the Quran, but also how many really beautifully illustrated and written versions there were of like the Shahnameh by Ferdowsi, a very important work of Iranian or Persian literature. There were also editions of Persian poetry, again a lot of Persian poetry, where it was just general anthologies of Persian poetry done in just beautiful calligraphy with some illustrations or some designs on it. It was just something else. I really had a great time looking at it. I wish I could talk a little bit more coherently about it all, but you will have seen the highlights, I hope, by now. So that's that. Really glad I went. Very tired. Gonna eat my dinner. My dinner is actually in the air fryer right now, so you may hear some rumbling. But anyway, I'm glad I went, and I'm glad you all could come along. My tiredness notwithstanding, I would be remiss if I didn't show some of the, or all of the, really, Polaroids that I took today. This is the fire hydrant I referred to earlier. I think it's a little charming. Alright, that's the train track. And this is a better photo of the train track. So it's in sepia tone. I actually kind of like this one. I think it might turn out well, but it might not turn out well. I'm not sure. We will see. But I kind of like this one. This is from the city. So this is a shop that was not yet open with all those stupid little souvenirs you can get. And I just thought, oh, look, it's 3-4 versions of the Statue of Liberty with King Kong on the Empire State Building in the middle. That could make a charming little Polaroid. And I took a second one. Yeah, the second one I kind of used a different filter. I think this one looks kind of cool. Let's see. Ah, yes. And then this is a bronze archway in the, I believe it's the New York City Hall Park. There's a very small park near New York City Hall, and there are a series of bronze sculptures there, and one of them is this sort of arch guy, which I thought looked kind of cool. And then there's the second one of the arch, and then I think that might be all. Yeah, that's one of the photos I took earlier in the month. So really, I didn't, ironically, end up taking many photos in the city, even though I kind of brought my Polaroid camera along, thinking, I'll be in the city. There's a lot of stuff there. But taking photos in the city can be weird because you've got so many people around and you get self-conscious and stuff. So anyway, but those are some Polaroids. We'll see which ones I keep. So, one more thing. You will notice that it is now darker. That's because it's later the same day as the last clip and that I've changed into a comfortable shirt. But one more thing I wanted to talk about was the book that I started. The book that I started is not a book that I originally set aside for Framed in September, or that I thought was relevant to Framed in September. And the book is, you might not be able to see the cover very well, but the cover doesn't have much on it. It's Rolf in the Woods by Ernest Thompson Seton. So this was published in 1911. Ernest Thompson Seton, for anyone who doesn't know about him, he was actually one of the founders of the Boy Scouts of America, in addition to being, in his time, a popular writer. He was actually really well known for writing fiction from the perspective of animals. One of his most famous books is, I think, just called Wild Animals I Have Known. And then he also wrote a book called The Life of a Grizzly, I think, about a grizzly bear. Rolf in the Woods is a book about a young boy named Rolf, who, when he's 15 years old, decides to leave the home that he's staying in and start living with this Native American man named Quanab. And the book takes place, I think, in the early 19th century. And it takes place in upstate New York, which is where I'm from. And when I started it, I didn't really think of it as a Framed in September book. And I'm not going to say that it is. But one thing that I forgot about Ernest Thompson Seton when I began this book, and which maybe a lot of people don't think of when they think of him, he was, in addition to a writer and a founder of Boy Scouts of America, he was an artist. He painted animals a lot and other nature scenes, and he drew a lot. Editing Lukash here just to say that actually I'm pretty sure most of the artwork that Seton is known for are drawings. I don't know if he's really known for paintings, and all of the artwork that I show subsequently are drawings. So I just want to make that clear. And some of his artwork and drawings are included in Rolf in the Woods. And so this book, which I didn't start reading because it had anything to do with Framed in September, I think is kind of a Framed in September read. And I wanted to just show a couple of the paintings and drawings in the book. So I'm going to switch the angle, turn on a light here, and show you a little bit of what's in here. So if we just turn to the opening passages, so we've got a drawing right there, which presumably is by Ernest Thompson Seton. Let me just go to the very first painting in it. There it is. And that is Quanab, the Native American man,
whom Rolf begins to make a life with. We've got a drawing there that I don't think that's supposed to be Quinab. I think that's supposed to be the mean man who Rolf is living with at the beginning of the book, who's kind of abusive and alcoholic. But let me find some of the drawings that I really like in this. There is a raccoon. Love that. There is, I think, a bald eagle, possibly. There is a teepee. There's another painting that is once again Quinab doing his sunrise song. Now, one thing about this book is it was published in 1911, and so the portrayal of the Native American man, Quinab, is a little questionable, maybe more than a little, but it could be much worse, I will say. There's a dog. There's their dog, Skookum. There's a little guy. There is a snapping turtle with whom Quinab has a pretty intense fight at one point. There's an owl. Love that. And down here, there's the dog with a bone in his mouth, or maybe that's a stick, I'm not quite sure. And there's another painting. That's the dog getting into a bunch of chickens that he shouldn't be in. He shouldn't be attacking those chickens. Let me see. I want to find my favorite drawing in the collection so far. In the book so far. Let me find that. This is my favorite of the drawings. I believe it is supposed to be a raven. So I really like that one. We've also got the dog, a painting of the dog attacking a porcupine, which he regrets afterward. And then there's one more painting I can show you. Yeah, one more painting. A fox facing down a lynx. So the paintings aren't my favorite. These aren't my favorite kind of artwork. I feel like they're a little caricatured. I'm not a huge fan of them. But the drawings I find very charming. And I love how they're just sprinkled throughout the text like this. And they always have to do with something going on in the book at the time. So I really like that. I really love how it's set up. So anyway, I wanted to show this off because it was sort of an unexpected framed in September read. So it is now September 21st. It's Sunday. And what I'm going to show you in a second is actually something that happened yesterday. So this weekend I spent at my brother and sister-in-law's place. They live in central New York in Edmiston, which is like close-ish to Oneonta, but it's like central New York. And we just spent the weekend together. You know, I spent the weekend with them and with my two nieces, but also we went to something called the Harvest Fest at a brewery that is very close to my brother and sister-in-law's. The brewery is called High Burl Brewery. And it was just a place with a bunch of vendors, right, selling all sorts of arts and crafts and whatnot. And there was food. We didn't really eat food, but we got beer. We went and looked at the arts and crafts that were for sale. And we went for a hayride as well. But the part that I'm going to show you is the musicians who performed. There were two musicians who performed, 10 Gallon Matt and Fairweather Blues. So just local sort of country folk singers, performers, and they were enjoyable to listen to, especially Fairweather Blues. I really, really liked them. 10 Gallon Matt was pretty decent, but pretty basic. But I'll show you a little bit of both of them. And so I guess that fulfills kind of part of this challenge in terms of going to see like a performance, you know, because they were playing pretty much the whole time we were there, and we did sit and listen to a lot of their music. So here's a little clip of that.
Something tall and strong, make it a hurricane before I go to sing. It's only 12:30, I don't care. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. One more time. Thank you, folks. She called the gate, left me a mule to ride. Yeah, my baby called the gate, left me a mule to ride. Train pulled down and I was one on behind. And I'm crazy about her, hard-headed woman of mine. And my baby's gone.
Hello again, everyone. It's now September 23rd, and I just finished watching the film Pollock. This is the film directed by and starring Ed Harris about Jackson Pollock. I literally just turned it off. It literally just ended, and so my thoughts are going to be quite raw about it. And boy, I didn't really quite realize what I was getting myself into, I don't think. It was quite heavy, especially toward the end. But I have to say, I haven't necessarily seen a ton of films about painters. I've certainly seen a handful, but I think this one is easily the best. I thought it was really excellent. I'm surprised that I haven't heard more about it as one of the best films of its year. I thought it was so brilliant. Ed Harris as Jackson Pollock I thought was brilliant. The actress who plays his wife, Lee Krasner, whose name I really feel bad I forgot her name, but she was excellent. I know she won an Oscar for her performance. I thought she was superb. I thought it was so well written. I thought it was beautifully shot as well. I actually thought the cinematography was really lovely. I just felt like it was a really great character study, as well as a study of an artist, of the life of this very troubled artist. I just thought it all around, it was extremely well executed. It really just showed Pollock's artistic rise and personal highs and lows, and then just his deterioration, which is why it got so heavy toward the end. He really got quite bad toward the end of his life, at least if this film is accurate, which I guess at this point I'm assuming it's mostly accurate. I loved the way that it engaged with his work. It felt very much like a film for art nerds, which I don't necessarily call myself an art nerd. I appreciate art. Obviously, I know some about it. I have my artists who I really like. This very much feels like a film that was made by and would be really interesting for art nerds who know a lot about modern art, because it's not just about Pollock. I mean, Willem de Kooning makes an appearance. I think Franz Klein even makes an appearance, or at least is mentioned. Another artist, his last name was Clifford Still. He's mentioned. There's some in here about Peggy Guggenheim and her work putting on modern artists, putting on shows of modern artists. There's some about art criticism in this as well. I also just, again, back to the filmmaking, I thought the use of music was lovely. There are some points where music plays a role in the story. Very small role, but I think really lovely role. Some songs that weren't composed for the score, but also music that was composed for the score. I just thought it was really excellent. I thought it was quite brilliant. I certainly want to highly recommend it to anyone watching. Not just if you're interested in Jackson Pollock, but if you're just interested in a damn good movie, I think. So 2 thumbs up, even though I can only put 1 thumb up because I'm holding the phone with my arm right now. But 2 thumbs up, just imagine another thumb. I thought Pollock was pretty awesome. So It kind of makes me sad that Ed Harris hasn't directed more films. I think he's only directed maybe 1 or 2 or 3 at the most films. He seems to be a talented director, if this is at all indicative of what he can do. And he gives on a great performance. Again, I feel like Ed Harris just has one of those faces that's like a landscape itself, you know? So I thought that this was great. I'm really glad I watched it. It was very heavy, so I think I'm going to unwind a little bit after this and watch something a bit lighter. Some TV show probably, but anyway, I'll leave it at that. Those are my thoughts on Pollock. Hello again, everybody. It's now September 28th, which means that the end of Framed in September is upon us. And I would like to wrap up this whole vlog today. I will say at the outset of this little clip that I'm not going to make it to Arts Westchester. I did in my TBR, TBD video where I talked about what I want to read and what I want to do for this event. I talked about going to Arts Westchester, which is a little art gallery here in White Plains, the city I live in, which is like a 5-minute walk from me. I'm not going to get there. I did set out to go there yesterday, and I even started to record a vlog of it, but then for some reason it was closed. I thought it was open on Saturdays from 12 to 6, but the doors were locked when I got there. So the Arts Westchester visit is not going to happen, but we got to the Metropolitan Museum of Opera, and I will certainly visit Arts Westchester at some point. But I want to wrap up everything else today. That starts with the last film I wanted to see. So there's another change of plans there. I originally wanted to watch Loving Vincent, Pollock, and Mr. Turner, the great Mike Leigh film about J.M.W. Turner, a painter who I absolutely adore. I started Mr. Turner last night, and I ended up turning it off after a half hour. Not because I was not liking it, not because I did not think I would love it if I kept watching it, but for some reason I was just not feeling it. I don't know. With me and what films I'm going to watch, as with what books I'm going to read, I really do need to kind of be in the mood. And for whatever reason, I just didn't feel in the mood for a 2.5 hour slow burn film about this painter. And another difficulty I started to have with Mr. Turner was that the version that I was watching did not have subtitles, and the way that the actor who plays J.M.W. Turner, whose name escapes me right now, but he's the actor who played Wormtail in the Harry Potter films. He's that actor, if you know him. He playing Mr. Turner very well. It's a very good performance, but the way that he speaks, it's very just kind of slurred and fast, and that combined with the British accent just makes it almost impossible for me to understand him much of the time, and so I would need subtitles. And so I need to find a version of that film with subtitles. So, unfortunately, I'm not going to get to Mr. Turner for Framed in September, but I did watch another film, which I think is also relevant to Framed in September, and it was a knockout of a film. So I ended up watching Phantom Thread, which is from 2017, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Daniel Day-Lewis, Leslie Manville, and many other actors. And in this film, Daniel Day-Lewis plays a dressmaker named Reynolds Woodcock, which whoever comes up with a name like Woodcock for a fictional character, I don't know. But he plays a dressmaker who kind of kicks off a relationship with a young woman who he meets at a cafe when she's waitressing. So she serves as his waitress at this cafe, and he meets her and he wants her to be a model for the dresses that he designs. And so he takes her and starts to employ her as a model and becomes kind of his muse in his dressmaking endeavors. And they also start what seems like this sort of quasi-romantic relationship, but a relationship that is very ambivalent. At least on his end, it is very ambivalent. And it just goes forward from there. It explores the dynamics of desire and power between this woman who Reynolds takes as a model and Reynolds himself. Reynolds' sister, Cyril, who's played wonderfully by Leslie Manville, is also a major character, and she is also partly in charge of his dressmaking business, of his house, as it's called. And she comes into the dynamic. So it's this kind of three-way dynamic between these three characters, all of whom are really well acted, for one thing, but all of whom also have mind-bogglingly complex relationships with one another. And the film was just remarkable. I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson, I've been a long-time fan of his films. This was a big gap in my coverage of his filmography. So this was the 7th Paul Thomas Anderson film that I've seen. Other films I've seen by him, many of them I absolutely adore. A lot of them I've seen more than twice. And I always find something new in any of the films I've seen by him. I always find something new when I watch it again. So Phantom Thread was just beautifully directed. The cinematography was very understated, but very kind of dance-like. I felt like the cinematography almost mimicked the way that the models who we see modeling and going on runways with Reynolds' dresses. I felt like the cinematography almost mimicked their movements in really beautiful ways. And it's also just beautifully composed shots as well. There's a score by Johnny Greenwood, another knockout score by Johnny Greenwood, I thought. It's a bit of an irony that I am much more familiar with Johnny Greenwood's film music than I am with anything that Radiohead has released, which isn't necessarily because I have anything against Radiohead. I like some of their big hits, but I've just never really dived into their work. But Johnny Greenwood's a hell of a film composer. He's a hell of a composer, and this was no exception. And Paul Thomas Anderson just knows how to use score music. The music is in this film for most of its runtime, and I feel like it never feels invasive. Sometimes when there's score music in a film for too much of the runtime, it can just end up feeling a little invasive, like it needs to calm down a little bit, it's trying to force you to feel things, right? When maybe it should be holding back and maybe letting there be some more silence to let the characters and the drama sort of breathe a little bit. But in this film, I did not find the music at all invasive. And this film, like with Paul Thomas Anderson's film The Master, which is my favorite of his films, there's just so many different angles with which to interpret this film, which I always love films where you can interpret them in a lot of different ways. You can take a lot of different angles, none of which is quite mutually exclusive, but all of which kind of have a different perspective. The thing that I was thinking about a lot throughout this film was the sexuality of the characters. Reynolds Woodcock, again with that last name Woodcock, comes off as fairly effeminate. He comes off as kind of feminine. And he's a dressmaker, of course, so there's that. And he also, you have to kind of notice that when he and Alma, who I forgot to mention Alma's name. Alma is the young woman he takes as on as a model and starts a sort of relationship with. You have to notice that he seems very hesitant about approaching her as an object of desire. Even though he was so enthusiastic about hiring her as a model, he seems very hesitant about seeing her as an object of desire. And then even after he and Alma do start a romantic relationship, he's very ambivalent toward her. He doesn't even seem to like her very much, you know? And it just made me wonder, you know, is this because, in part, he just isn't really attracted to her? Maybe he's not attracted to women. And we see in the second half of the film this really dramatic plot device develop that Alma uses. I don't want to spoil it, but that Alma uses. And I wonder whether she uses it to get Reynolds' attention because she knows that he will never actually see her as a proper object of desire. So you can, and then Cyril as well. Cyril actually really set off my gaydar a little bit, she comes off as kind of masculine, and there are a couple points where you kind of notice her observing Alma a little bit, and you're thinking, oh, well, is Cyril maybe the one who's really attracted to her? And she also seems to like Alma a lot more than Reynolds was, with a lot less ambivalence. So there's that dynamic. I think you could interpret Reynolds as being a stand-in for like a film director, and Alma and the other models that he works with, and the sewers who sew the dresses together. You could see his relationship to all of them as being kind of like the director to the cast and crew. You could also, of course, look at this in terms of like gender dynamics, and Reynolds being this man who's in charge of this house that produces dresses, and Alma being someone who is sort of beholden to him, right? And so that adds a very problematic power dynamic to their relationship. And that, of course, comes with it the whole gender dynamic, of course. Reynolds Woodcock is seemingly the only man who works at this dressmaking company. So it's him and a bunch of women, but he is the one in charge. So you could also see it in terms of gender dynamics and how the women that work for him try to take some agency, especially Alma, but also Cyril. So there's just a lot of different angles in this film. I loved it, thought it was brilliant, definitely going to watch it again, and I'm certain I will get more out of it as I rewatch it. And I thought it counted for Framed in September because it's about a dressmaker. And as the hosts of Framed in September have pointed out, the arts, quote unquote, can be applied very broadly to a lot of different areas that maybe people sometimes don't think of, right? When we hear the name Framed in September, we think of painting, of course, because a frame. But you could also extend that to the performing arts, to dance and music. And of course, I've included some music in this vlog. But you could also include things like interior design. Heather Gregg has talked about interior design a little bit in one of her videos. But then you could also look at fashion. And this film is all about fashion, of course. The main character, Reynolds, is a dressmaker. And another kind of cool aspect of this is it's a snapshot of the world of high-end dressmaking in the 1950s, that is. But nonetheless, this is this portrait of this world in the 1950s. And so anyway, it felt really relevant to Framed in September. And also because I think another kind of obvious interpretation of this film is that it's kind of looking at an artist's relationship to the people in his life. Whether they're his sister, right? We have Reynolds' sister, Cyril. Whether it's a lover, whether it's their employees. And as that too, it's just very compelling. You know, it reminds me of some of the other great films that have been made about artists or craftsmen who are so obsessive with their work that it kind of makes their relationships with people more complicated because of how all-consuming their work is. So Phantom Thread was a hell of a film. So that's my spiel about Phantom Thread. I probably had more to say about it than any of the other films that I watched. So I'm going to take a sip of my coffee before I continue. So now what I would like to close this vlog out with is a little about the Polaroids that I took. I said in my TBD TBR video that I was going to try to take 15 Polaroids, and I think I've succeeded. I don't know, but I have printed out several. I have several printed out Polaroids that I want to show you. And some of them I think are better than others. None of them is quite to my satisfaction, but I'm happy I tried to take them. And I will, of course, keep them all because film is expensive. And some of them are kind of neat. So I want to show the Polaroids that I printed, but first I want to show the Polaroids that I didn't print. I want to show all the Polaroids that I actually took. So I'm going to turn the camera around and focus it on the actual Polaroid camera, and I'll show you some of what I took. Okay, so this is one that I took this morning. And I thought it was kind of cool with... So this is my kitchen, and you can see the cat through the kitchen door.
and I thought it was pretty cool with the lighting and the open door. This one I did print, but let me go back actually to the beginning of the month. There we go. All right, so this is the first Polaroid that I took. I might still print this one. I haven't for now. It was just a little bit of an artsy-fartsy thing. So these are a pair of my pants that needed to dry. This Polaroid, by the way, was taken at my family's cabin up in the Adirondacks at the beginning of the month. And my sweatpants had gotten wet, and so they were sitting out to dry. And so this is a bit of an artsy-fartsy photo I decided to take of them. Let's move on. All right, this one I printed. I thought it was kind of a cool image of a dead cicada. All right, that's a cicada shell. I like the contrast in it with the black and white, and I used one of the filters to create those weird little like rainbow things at the edges. And a caterpillar. Yes, I printed this one as well, so I'll show you this one again. But kind of a neat photo of a caterpillar. Some moss. I didn't print this one. I took some other photos of moss. Yeah, this is another filter. This is actually a filter where you can mirror image something. So actually these two sides of the photo are mirrored. I haven't printed this one. I think it might look cool, but I've hesitated to print it just because I'm not entirely certain it's as good as it could be. More moss. Let's see. Yes, this one. So I kind of like this one because you can see it's got a flower, and the flower is a little bit bedraggled, but still rather pretty. And I like that there's a little insect on one of the petals. So I printed that one out. And then that one, that's actually on campus, the campus where I work, around a pond that's at the middle of campus. And that one is too. I took a handful of photos there. Yeah, that one as well. I didn't print this one, and I don't think I will. I think it didn't turn out quite as nice as I thought. Some flowers. This one I took when I went out to take some photos outside my apartment building. Not sure how I feel about it. It might be a little bit too bright, especially up in this area. And then this one, I showed this one before. I think it's a little bit plain for me to print, so I think I'll leave it. This is a statue, well, I should say a sculpture of Martin Luther King Jr. that is here in White Plains. I took a few, actually. Yeah, I took one. The first one was monochrome. So I believe that's monochrome. And then this is, I think, sepia tone. And then I'm not sure what filter that one is. But I'm not sure how it would turn out with how bright it is. I mean, you can see how bright the background is. I'm just not sure it would end up looking very good. So I haven't printed it. Let's see. Okay, I took this around town as well. Just some plants. I'm not sure how I feel about it. More plants. Other plants. The fire hydrant. I mentioned the fire hydrant. I actually kind of like this one, weirdly. I might print it eventually. But I'll see. This one of the train station, I took two from two angles. I prefer this angle. Yeah, I definitely prefer this angle. And then I showed this one of King Kong on the Empire State Building among a bunch of statues of Liberty. There it is again with a different filter. This archway from New York City. Yep, there it is again. Again with a different filter. And then we're back at that one. Okay, so let me now show you the Polaroids that I actually printed. All right, we got the caterpillar. I only just printed that one today, but I liked it. I think it turned out, it actually looks better than I thought. Funnily enough, it actually looks better in the phone camera than it does in real life. So you all might think it looks wonderful, but I can kind of see that it's a little bit, the lighting is a little bit washed out. But it's pretty decent. I kind of like it. It's kind of cool. Here's that flower. Again, it looks better actually in the phone camera than it does in real life. But it still looks pretty cool. You know, again, I like how the flower is kind of a little bit bedraggled, a little bit run down, but then it still is quite pretty, and it's got the insect. I think it gives it kind of that candid look, or look of sort of realism, you know? Okay, we got King Kong amid the statues of liberty. I like this one. I think it's kind of charming. I'm glad I took it. I took it while the store that front is from was still closed, so I didn't have to feel super self-conscious about taking it in front of the store. And this one, I'm happy with this one. I like this one. This might be my favorite. I think it's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool with the door open there. I think the lighting's kind of neat. There's definitely a filter on this, but it looks cool. And the cat being through the door like that. I wish she were in a better position, but, you know, she's a cat. You can't really force her into a position, you know. But I like this one. Okay, this one that I took on campus. Okay, and this one of the cicada. So a lot of these you will have seen already by this point in the video, because I've added them to the actual video itself. But yeah, and then here, a little bit out of order now, but this is that train track. I kind of liked it. It might be a little bit much with the black and white, a little bit too bright, but I kind of like it. So anyway, that is my, let's see here. So that's my framed in September. I hope you enjoyed the vlog. I know this is going to be ungodly long, so if you've made it to this point, then you deserve a prize. I don't have a prize for you, but you deserve a prize. This has been a great event. I really enjoyed doing this vlog. It actually makes me kind of want to do more vlogs like this. So maybe I'll try it again in the future. I don't know. But thank you all for watching, those of you who have made it to this point. Even if you haven't made it to this point and you aren't even watching by now, thank you for watching any length of this video. And I'd love to hear any comments on stuff in the comments. I mean, if you have something to say about the various places I went, films I watched, books I read, whatever, then let me know what you think. And anyway, I will leave it at that and see you all in my next video.